Need for Speed 2 was launched in 1997, almost 25 years ago. It was the same year that Gran Turismo launched, and between the two of them, the way we enjoy racing games changed forever. Back in 1997, I didn't have a PlayStation, but we did have a family PC. With a staggering 12 cars to choose from and 6 tracks, you could easily spend a summer holiday chasing McLaren F1s and Jaguar XJ220s around the world. Now here we are almost 3 decades later, and the gaming landscape has changed completely. But what happened to the cars of Need for Speed 2? And what are they worth today? Can you buy them? Are they for sale? The cars in Need for Speed 2 were split into 3 classes, A, B and C. Starting with Class C, we have the Lotus Esprit V8, the Ferrari 355, the Ford Mustang Mach-3 and the Ital-designed Carla. The Esprit had been around since 1976, but the Series 4, or the final iteration of the Esprit, arrived in 1994, 3 years before Need for Speed 2. With a 3.5-litre V8 featuring 2 Garrett turbochargers, the Esprit V8 was good for 350 horsepower and a top speed of 175 miles an hour. You can find an Esprit V8 in the UK for about £50,000, making it our most reasonably priced Need for Speed 2 car. Like the Lotus, the Ferrari 355 arrived in 1994 and had a 3.5-litre V8 engine, but without the turbos. With 375 horsepower, the Ferrari was also good for around 170 miles an hour, and when I sat down to write this video, I really thought the Lotus was a much weaker contender than this on paper. There was a time when a Ferrari 355 could be had for about 30 grand, but those days are long gone. The cheapest hardtop I found at the time of writing was £77,000. Class C also features 2 concept cars, the Ital-designed Carla and the Ford Mustang Mach-3. The Mustang Mach-3 dates from 1993, acting as a sort of weird bridge between the squared-off Fox-body 3rd generation Mustangs and the 4th generation that would arrive in 94. It's a wildly styled, curvaceous 2-seat roadster of sorts, but it never even got close to production. It seems it was more to get the public ready for the new, more rounded, softer Mustang design of the later 1990s. As only 2 concepts were built, you can't buy one, which is a good job because, come on, it's dog ugly. Our second concept car from Class C, on the other hand, is absolutely beautiful. The Ital-designed Carla was revealed at the 1995 Geneva Motor Show, envisioned by Ital-design to replace the aging Lamborghini Jalpa. For me, the Carla did everything that Lamborghini should have done and have tried to do since. It captured elements of the great Lamborghinis of old, but packed it in a contemporary way. Check out the Miura-style slanted headlights and the Countach windscreen. It has the perfect stance and style. I particularly like the shaped sunroofs for driver and passenger. The Carla was never anything more than a concept car, but it paved the way for the arrival of the baby Lamborghini, that we now call the Gallardo. Moving up in the world and onto Class B, we once again have 2 road cars and 2 concept cars. The Isdera Commendator 112i, I hope I've said that correctly, is a German concept car built in 1993, intended to be a replacement for the Imperator 108. Quite why a super rare, super low volume, super niche, 30 units only German supercar needed replacing is beyond me, because I'm guessing you had never heard of it either until I just told you about it. Anyway, the Commendator was designed to be fast, shaped like a fish, but powered by a 6.9-litre V12 engine borrowed from Mercedes-Benz. Officially, only one was built, but the story gets quite interesting from here. A second chassis and body moulds were bought by an enthusiast who intended to build another one. It was completed, but by the time it was built, the enthusiast had lost his enthusiasm and Isdera themselves had disowned the car, so it became known as the Silver Arrow 112 instead. A chap called Albert from Switzerland then bought it for €1.5 million, kept it for 5 years, and then tried, unsuccessfully, to sell it for €3 million. Double or nothing and all that. He did then manage to sell it, but not for €3 million, and straight back to Isdera, who had disowned it in the first place. They then restored the car back to the original Isdera spec, or as I like to call it, Need for Speed 2 spec, and sold it to an auction in Paris in 2021 for €1.1 million. So there you have it. You can buy one, but there is only one, and you're going to need very deep pockets and the right connections. Next up, we have one of my favourite of all the Need for Speed cars, the Jaguar XJ220. Now, there's a lot to say about the XJ220, so I'll save all that for another video. But the XJ220 and the market for them has been very interesting indeed. Developed in 1988 by a team of people working out of hours, it was shown at the British International Motor Show in 1988 and it got a very positive response. When the car was announced, prospective buyers were told it would be a V12 with four-wheel drive and the deposits came flooding in. As the project developed, the engines dropped from 12 cylinders to 6 and from four-wheel drive to 2, and the buyers dropped like flies. Obviously, this wasn't helped by a downturn in the supercar market and a tightening of the emissions regulations. Jaguar built 275 XJ220s with a retail price of $470,000. The 3.5-litre turbocharged V6 engine gave the big cat more than 500 horsepower, and the gorgeous, slippery design allowed it to achieve more than 200 miles an hour, or closer to 223 if you remove the catalytic converters. In true British fashion, it was utterly brilliant while simultaneously being a bit crap. Look, I love the XJ220, it never was a bit crap, but it did have the rear lights from a Rover 200. The press received the car very well indeed, but it was huge and apparently the doors didn't open wide enough. Jaguar had planned to build 350 of them, but they just weren't selling. Interestingly, the McLaren F1 was in a very similar boat. In 1997, the last of the unsold XJ220s was sold for £127,000. The retail price was £420,000. It was a big hit for Jaguar. From there on, the values dipped before climbing, dropping, and finally climbing again. I remember being at the NEC Classic Motor Show in 2013 and seeing an XJ220 with a sticker price of £169,000. 2 years ago, I inquired with a dealer about a price on application car that I'd found online and I was writing about. I was told it was £350,000, and as I write this in 2022, you won't get much change from £500,000. There are Jaguar XJ220s out there to buy, but you really should have bought one a decade ago. Moving on to the two concept cars in Class B, we have the Ford Indigo and the Ital-designed Nazca C2. The Nazca is another V12 supercar, this time borrowing the engine from a BMW 850. More than just a prototype, there were actually 3 real cars built, intended as a replacement for the BMW M1, but BMW were reluctant due to the financial failure of the now very sought-after M1, the proper one, not the 1 Series one. The one reference I could find to a C12 being for sale dates from a decade ago, where a blue one was offered for €725,000. So I guess if you're asking, can I buy one? The answer is a resounding no, because first you've got to find one. The Ford Indigo was yet another V12 dream machine designed to showcase Ford's IndyCar technologies. It never went into full production, which is good because it kind of looks like a duck. The engine itself is cool because the 435 horsepower unit would go on to power the Ford-built Aston Martins of the 1990s. Ford only built 3 of these ducks and one did pop up for sale in 2019, however there was a catch. The $195,000 price tag didn't include the engine. If you've fallen in love with this ugly duckling and simply have to have one, I can highly recommend the better looking, road-ready Plymouth Prowler. Though at the time of writing, I can't find one for sale in the UK, so you'll have to get one imported, and you better make sure it's metallic purple. Right, that concludes Class B. Let's have a look at the top of the class, the cream of the crop, the premium options. The Lotus GT1 road car is the road-going version of the race version of a road car. You got it? It arrived in 1994 and is sort of the underdog. Porsche is to blame because they came up with a 911 GT1 to go racing with it, and they pushed the GT racing game out of reach for many manufacturers. Mercedes then replied with a CLK GTR that they built and developed by secretly buying a McLaren F1, taping some different body panels to it until it was spotted by McLaren, who told them to stop. True story. Lotus realised that in order to stay competitive, they needed to compete with these multi-million-dollar cars. But they checked the piggy bank, and as usual for Lotus, they only had a budget of about 65 pence. But what they did have was some sticky back plastic and the British stiff upper lip. They also had a washing up bottle, some fiberglass, a Corvette engine, some turbochargers and a welder. The end result pushed 450 horsepower and weighed about the same as a package of crisps. It did 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, and on its first outing in the 1998 FIA GT season, 3 factory Elise GT1s came in joint first in the first race. Only joking, not one of them finished the race. I would love to tell you that the sticky back plastic Corvette powered 65p budget racer spent the rest of the season sticking it to the man, but that would be a lie. The engine wasn't good enough, the chassis wasn't sharp enough, and the wallet wasn't fat enough. Those who had purchased Lotuses to go racing in the GT class either folded or went off and bought different cars. The story does have a heroic ending though, so cheer up. In 2003, Lotus Elise GT1 chassis number 5 was purchased to use in the 12 hours of Sebring and 24 hours of Le Mans. Incredibly, the now 7-year-old car would go on to win both of those races, cementing a place in the history book for sticky back plastic and the good old British spirit of ingenuity. Except I made all of that up. The car did get its 15 minutes of fame, but unfortunately, Sebring was a 12-hour race. Yeah, the car lasted 7 laps, or about 15 minutes. Thankfully, a mechanic put the whole Lotus GT1 thing out of its misery by setting fire to the garage in the pit lane and burning it all to the ground before anyone was able to say, "What about Le Mans?" That didn't happen either, but it should have done. What a flop. In order to go racing, Lotus did have to produce a fixed number of road versions of the race car. And again, I'd love to say they built 65 examples and they were a sales success. But instead, they just built one and no one knows where it is. So can you buy one? No. Well, would you really want to? Our next Class A Need for Speed car is the Ford GT90, a staggeringly futuristic concept intended to be the successor to the legendary GT40. Like many of the cars in this list, it featured a V12 engine pushing 720 horsepower, and it definitely didn't borrow any of the juicy parts and knowledge that the Jaguar XJ220 was based on. I mean, it's not like Ford owned Jaguar at the time and they were stealing all of the Brits' ideas or something. Personally, I think the GT90 is a thing of beauty, and although it never saw production, it did herald a new design era for Ford. The sole surviving GT90 was scheduled to appear in an auction in 2009, but it was pulled from the sale before anyone could open the bidding. Perhaps we'll see this car again sometime, but for now, you can't buy it. Now, some would say I've saved the best for last with the McLaren F1 and the Ferrari F50. The F1 is arguably the most popular and mythical car in the world, with the most recent auction sale reaching a hammer price of more than $20 million. But this wasn't always the case. Prices have risen steadily, but only relatively recently. At the time the F1 was built, McLaren, like Jaguar with the XJ220, was struggling to meet their sales targets. Now, just for context, and I don't want to get political or talk about the state of the world, but can you imagine Bugatti or any of those big-ticket, big-name manufacturers launching a special edition supercar with a huge price tag and not finding any buyers today? The world has changed, but hey-ho, the McLaren F1 was sold at a loss originally, and it wasn't until decades later that prices began to rocket. There were 69 road cars made, which I've documented in my other videos. You could buy one, but you'll have to find one for sale, and then get in line behind all the Arab sheikhs and the inner circle of wealthy friends of the McLaren dynasty. But keep your eye on Facebook Marketplace, because you never know. Lastly, we have the Ferrari F50, another legendary car that was designed to both celebrate and replace another legendary car. This spiritual successor to the F40 was built between 1995 and 1997, with only 349 examples to go around. For me, the F50 is one of the greatest looking Ferraris of all time, and I'd absolutely buy one if my numbers came up on the lottery. And a lottery win is what you'll need, because you're going to need about £3 million. And there you have it. That's my Need for Speed 2 video, done and dusted, and now I'm off to eBay to find myself a Lotus Esprit, and then I'm heading to Poundland for some sticky back plastic and some super glue. So I'll see you at Le Mans. Thanks for watching.
Geoff buys cars. Still, YouTube's most boring car channel.